Once again, good afternoon, and welcome to another one of our programs through our Celebrate Aging series. Today, we're very happy to welcome another one of our residents, Jorie Miller, to hear her unique stories. We're also happy to have in the audience some of her family, including her children, Rebecca, Pete, who's here from Kentucky, and Kathy, and grandchildren, Carrie and Harlan. So before beginning the interview, I'd like to share a general timeline of Jorie's life in order to frame this interview for you. Marjorie Schmidt Miller was born to Bill and Luella Schaus Schmidt in 1930 in Buffalo, New York. She was the youngest sister of Harry and David and loved growing up as a city girl. Jorie graduated from high school in 1947 and entered Michigan State University. In her junior year, she acquired tuberculosis and moved back to New York near her family, spending a full year in a sanitarium. She finished her college career, though, at the University of Rochester, where she also met her husband, Mike. Jorie and Mike were married in 1952, and then between 1953 and 58, they became the parents of 5 children. Yes, 5 children in 5 years. In 1969, they moved the family to Connecticut for Mike's work. And then in 1989, Jorie and Mike moved to Sarver and enjoyed tending to their 25 acres of woods and lawns. In 1997, they moved to Butler, and Mike passed away just 6 months after that move. Then Jorie moved here to Passavant in 2017, living first in the Forrester Apartments, and then in the Abundant Life Center Apartments, and now in Blue Ridge. While here, Jorie has stayed active through her paintings, exercising, and enjoying her weekly dinners at the Barron's Inn with her special friends throughout the years. In addition to her 5 children, Jorie has 11 grandchildren, 25 great-grandchildren, and 8 great-great-grandchildren. So at this point, we can start our conversation. So Jorie, let's just start by you telling us a little bit about your mother and your father. Where did they call home? What kind of work did your father do?
Oh, my mother and dad were Canadians.
Canadians?
They lived in Ontario. My mother was in Waterloo, Ontario, and my dad grew up in Stratford. Those 2 towns are about 30 miles apart. My dad, at the appropriate time, after he decided that he wanted to go into the ministry, he went to Waterloo College. And while he was there and going to school, he met my mother, who was at that point the chief operator of the Waterloo Telephone Company. So they met at church, as you would expect. And after my dad graduated, and he was called to a church in Port Huron, which is just across the river from Buffalo. So then they were there about 4 years when my brothers came along to join the family, and they moved to Buffalo, I think, in 1928, and I came along in 1930, and I enjoyed Buffalo, growing up in Buffalo. It was a very happy childhood and happy teenage years. We moved from Buffalo to Rochester.
Oh, I'm going to stop you right there. We're going to come back to your childhood.
Oh, okay.
Because you were the youngest of 3 children.
Right.
Tell me about your relationship with your brothers growing up, because I know you spoke fondly of them.
My brothers were really, really best friends. And, of course, there were other boys their age on the street. They're very good to me because they always let me hang around the edges. and treated me very well. They're very different in personality. Harry was pretty serious, but they were both very, very interested in sports, and so that was what was going on. Played, baseball and hockey and all those things were played in the streets because that's what you did.
Yeah.
But we had a good time. We had a happy childhood.
Well, tell me now, because you mentioned that your parents were from Canada.
Yes.
You were born in Buffalo, so you had different trips back to Canada.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about, and you had special memories with your grandmothers also.
Oh, we did travel back to visit the grandmothers several times a year. It was always a bit of an adventure because, in the 30s, cars, we didn't have a car with a heater or an air conditioner, so it was hot in the summer and it was cold in the winter. I know we took blankets to keep us warm, but the winter was the exciting time because the roads were always icy. We went off and fell in the ditch one time and got picked up by a truck and taken into town while my dad dealt with the car. But it was exciting, and it was fun because we had a bunch of cousins in Waterloo that were the same age as we were, so that was always fun to be there. The way that it was situated, on the trips mostly, we stopped at Waterloo first for my grandmother's house. And that was a big treat because whenever we went in there, Grandma quickly had our special treat to keep us going for the travel, and that was a brown sugar sandwich. Oh, they were good.
And you have to share with them how you make a brown sugar sandwich.
You gotta try one.
So just the bread, butter.
Bread and butter and brown sugar.
Yeah. And there it is. Very good. Because I know you said you always looked forward to getting out of the car and
spend a couple of hours there and have a good time. And then we went on to Stratford. They were very, very different families on the two sides, but really wonderful. And in Stratford, it was quiet because we didn't have any cousins there. But it was a wonderful town, and we roamed the town from one end to the other, and it was great. And the one story I told Patty about was my grandmother's treat. It always happened in the evening when everybody was just sitting around and chatting in the living room and didn't notice much of anything. But Grandma would disappear, and you didn't notice, and she wasn't gone very long. And then she'd come back with a big platter full of what she called cream candy. She made it so quick you couldn't imagine it. But it was a very special sort of a maple fudge-like. So good. So that was special. Both my grandmothers had big vegetable gardens in their yards, and they tended them so beautifully. They were beautiful gardens and a lot of vegetables. So that was always a treat to have all that good food.
And the other piece of information you shared, which I thought was so interesting, was that your first trip over to Canada.
Well, when we were the early days, when I was pretty young, when we went to Canada, the Peace Bridge wasn't there. You went to Canada on the ferry, across the river. And I can remember, took cars, so you'd ride down Ferry Street to the ferry. Well, the ferry went all the way through Buffalo, I think. But you'd get the car, went on the ferry, and get to the other side. And it was a little bit of an adventure every time. And I do remember the Peace Bridge being built because we'd go over there once in a while to see how it was coming along. So that made a big, big difference when you could go back and forth on the bridge.
Yep. Now I want to bring you to Ferry Street and growing up and how you loved being a city girl.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me about being a city girl and the things you did with your friends and your friends from Luther League. And
we had so much freedom at that time growing up. By the time I was 13, I think everybody knew their way around Buffalo by ferry. You could get on the ferry, and you could buy for 25 cents. You got 3 tokens.
on the trolley, was that the trolley system?
Streetcars.
Streetcars, okay.
That went down the middle of the road on their wires, and so we all, me and my friends and I, we all traveled wherever we took a mind to go on the streetcars, and you could be gone all day with your 3. You didn't need that. One token, you could get numerous transfers. So it was an interesting way to spend teenage years roaming around doing different things. We did a lot of bike riding also. Weekends, a group would generally get together and go to one of the parks or something and take our lunch and enjoy our fun. And the other thing I want to mention that's a little different than it is now, we had an area in Buffalo around a Humboldt Park. And around that park, there was a nice Buffalo Zoo, the Buffalo Historical Building, museum, and an art museum. And they were all, they were very worthwhile, and they were all free. We went to those places many, many times, and you almost always discovered something new. So that was a great thing to be able to do, just because you were looking for something to do. Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned your youth group, that you spent a lot of time with your youth group.
Well, my dad, of course, was a Lutheran minister, and it was a big church. People from different areas of Buffalo were part of it. We had a youth group of about 30 kids we had a lot of fun together, and went to roller skating rinks and went to the Y for swimming parties, and that's the group. On weekends, we all, as a big group, would bicycle out to the parks around the city and whatnot. So we had a jolly time. And then when I was in the middle of my senior year, we moved to Rochester. So that was another whole different experience.
Exactly. And you have an adventurous spirit, so that allowed you to have something new to explore.
Oh, yeah.
But Jorie,
I'll never stop wanting to explore.
Yep. Well, after high school, you chose to go to college.
Yes.
Tell us where you went, why you chose it, what you majored in.
Well, my brother Harry, who was the oldest, when he chose, he did a lot of his own investigation and things, and he chose to go to Michigan State College. Now it's Michigan State University, but when we were there, it wasn't a university yet, only a college. So he went there as a pre-med student, and then Dave was 2 years younger, but he was only 1 year behind in school. And he got out of high school at the height of the draft. And the only way he could avoid that was to go to college. And he was only 17. So he just went to college before high school even ended and got himself registered for the summer term, and that took care of Dave. And I went there because I wanted to study hotel management. And in looking for a place to study that, it was a choice between Michigan State College and Cornell. So, knowing a little more about Michigan State, I went there. So, I was in my third year when the TB hit me pretty hard. So I had to leave there and go home, where luckily there was a TB sanitarium in Rochester. So I spent a year there.
That's extremely interesting, because we read about that, but
It's all
I've not
gone.
known anybody.
It's all gone.
Tell us about what your experience was like in the sanitarium.
Well, that was an interesting experience. It was big wards. They must have had, I don't know, 16, 18 girls, women in the ward. And there were big windows from the floor to the ceiling, just one right after the other. And so the main thing they did for us was fresh air and lots of fattening food. And the idea was to move as little as possible, eat as much as you could possibly eat, and the windows were always open, night, winter and summer. And everybody had a lot of blankets. So it was quiet. We didn't wander around because it wasn't what was done. And so it was a strange experience. The most fun thing we had was there was a television on the floor, and the television went from one ward to the other every week. In our ward, we were lucky because it came to us on Wednesday, and that was the Milton Berle hour. So yeah, it was a strange interim. So.
And after a year, you were able to go home.
I was able to go home,
right.
But I wasn't really healed.
Right, because you were still treated for a number of years after that.
The main treatment I got was a I can't think. Anyway, what it was, they kept my left lung, that was the diseased lung, was kept deflated. And that made going into the hospital once a week. It lasted for almost 6 years to keep that lung deflated. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they stopped and everything was over with. Normal life really started.
Now, after you were able to go back home, I know you wanted to complete your degree.
I was allowed after 6 months to take a class or two at University of Rochester, and I chose to go to night school. It was easier all around, and that's where I met my husband, in an economics class, where coincidentally I was the only female, which didn't hurt a bit. And that's where I met my husband, Mike. And he was on the GI Bill, had been taking classes for a few years already. And when he was going 3 nights a week, he'd go to classes. And he finished finally his education in June when the littlest brother was born in July. So that's the end of my 5 years. When my husband was at school every night is when we had all these babies.
Well, I want to bring you back before you got married.
It was fairly busy, very busy.
Now, Jorie, what were your dates like? What would you and Mike do for dates?
Oh, well, of course, it was different times than now. You don't go and hang out and things like that. Dates were formal. And the first one we had was at Christmas time after fall term. And we went to, I still can't remember whether, I think it was Harvard. The men, still a men's school then. And the men had a Christmas, it came every year to the city. It was a big show that the Harvard boys put on, and it was very amusing. But I can't really remember a lot about it. That was our first date. But after that, we went to movies and took a walk in the park and that sort of thing.
You told me a story about a canoe.
Oh, yes. He had a wonderful canoe. And the first time I saw the canoe, it was a Sunday afternoon. The first time we'd had a date on a Sunday afternoon. And early in spring when it was a beautiful day. So he came, and all our dates had been kind of dressed up dates. We wasn't casual. Nothing was much casual in those days. So, dressed up dates. So it was the first time we were going to see each other. And, well, slacks for me. We never wore slacks except on picnic days. But for the first time I'd seen Mike, he was always dressed in business clothes. And the day he came, with the big canoe on top of the car, drove in the driveway, and he got out of that car wearing jeans, which you never saw anybody wearing jeans in those days. He is wearing jeans that fit quite nicely, and a cotton plaid shirt rolled up, and moccasins. And he looked pretty darn good.
So
we had a lovely afternoon in the canoe.
And then, not too much later, you ended up marrying him.
Yes.
Where did you get married, and do you have any special?
We got married, of course, in the church where my dad was. And my dad walked me up the aisle, and he went out to the vestry for a minute, and somebody sang, and he came back in looking like the minister, and he married us. And there was a simple reception, the church, and at that time we never had a church residence, but at that particular place had a very nice home. So they had the reception was just casual for our friends and relatives. So that was it.
Perfect. Now
life started over again.
Yep.
New life.
And now I'll bring you back to those 5 children. Kathy, Mike, Pete, Rebecca, and Matt.
That's
all within 5 years.
Yeah.
And always my first question is, how did you survive?
The first 2 were hard because you didn't know what you were doing, and they came in a hurry. So that was difficult. By the time Pete showed up, it was no big deal. And I think because I would calm down, Pete was very calm baby, very calm baby. Liked as soon as he could move around, then the kids just played together all the time. It was just what happened.
Well, you did say there was a year when all 5 children.
Yeah, that's the year that Kathy was in first grade, and Mike was in kindergarten. We didn't have any problem when Kathy was in first grade. But when Mike went to kindergarten, he started bringing home, and one year, all 5 kids, I don't know whether, they might have overlapped a little, but we had measles, mumps, and chicken pox. 5 kids. We had a whole year of sick kids. So that was quite an adventure.
You did say, though, that you were able to manage being a mom that way because you appreciated schedules and structure.
Well, first for the early years, I was still on my medication, so I didn't have a lot of breath, and there was a lot to be done. So I needed a nap. So my children all had a nap until they were going to school all day. And that was just the way the schedule ran. And at 7:30, bedtime started, and it was kind of, in those ways, it was kind of regimented, certain things at certain times, but I don't know if they even noticed it.
I know that in the mid-1950s, you end up moving to the country outside of Rochester, moving into an old farmhouse with no kitchen.
Yeah.
So
no, that wasn't the one with no kitchen.
It was the Connecticut one without a kitchen.
The one with no kitchen was when in 1968, I think, we moved to Connecticut.
Well, let's talk about your Rochester.
Rochester
home.
house was a big old house. It had 6 bedrooms, and the house was big. And one feature that was really nice, a great big, almost the whole length of the house was a big enclosed porch on the side. And it was a very big house. It had 1 bathroom on the first floor.
Oh, my. Well, let's go ahead and then talk about your house where you had to renovate your kitchen.
Yeah, there was really no kitchen. They had a sink in the little entry by the back door, and that was it. And so, eventually we were there for a while, and that had a lot of other problems. We did a lot of work on that house, but that kitchen, the floor, the dining room actually had a very crooked floor. Mm-hmm. So Mike decided he had to fix that before we were going to put a kitchen in, and it meant getting new joists underneath it. So the kitchen floor had a few boards still across it, but it was you had to pick your way across on the boards that were left there. I think everybody got a kind of a fun thing, having the basement hanging out down below. It was one of our great building and things that I think they lived most of their childhood with part of the house torn up, because we were always fixing old houses. Mm-hmm. So.
And you said that it wasn't that Mike was skilled at this by profession. He learned as he went.
He learned as we went.
Okay, and the kids all learned as you went also.
Well, they learned to live with it anyway.
When you finally did redo the kitchen, you had some wonderful appliances.
Actually, the floor, the dining room floor that was all ripped up, we changed that room into a kitchen when it was put together again. And where the kitchen should have been was turned into kind of a family room. So lots of walls down and plaster up and all that stuff. So.
And you talked about all the appliances too that you were able to get then since you created your new kitchen.
Yeah, well, it's kind of two different houses got mixed up.
I can't keep up with your houses.
So we were always remodeling houses.
Now you said one thing that kept you at peace was sewing.
Oh, I love, my mother always made all my clothes. And when I was a teenager, I got interested in it. And in a couple of years, I was good enough that I liked what I made. And from then on, my mom was freed, and I made all my clothes and some of the girls' clothes until they got a little older. And I stopped sewing about the beginning of this century because I couldn't find cloth that I was willing to make into anything that mattered. But I was always happy in my homemade clothes. So it was a kind of a renewal thing for me to sit down at the sewing machine and have time to do that. It was very good. Therapy. It was therapy.
You mentioned the different place that you've lived. You mentioned the different houses and the places you called home. In Connecticut, you were there for 20 years. In Sarver, you were there for 8 years.
Yeah.
Any special memories from either of those before you moved to Butler?
Oh,
Any other memories?
None of us were very happy in Connecticut. We never thought we'd be there that long, but that's how it turned out. The Sarver place was like my husband's heaven. Yes. And very, very good for him to have that time. We had a nice woods, and he got very interested in the conservation of woods with the forester from Butler County. So he got very interested and occupied with that. I got very interested in flower beds, and it was a lot of work and a lot of fun, and we left it in good shape. So, yeah, that was a very different kind of life than any other place we were with those last years. Very good. It was excellent.
That's wonderful.
No, it was very good.
And then you end up moving to Butler.
We were in Butler, and that was a very good place too. It was very good, especially I would never have stayed in the Sarver house by myself.
Yeah.
Probably not even for one night. I wouldn't have stayed there, even though it was great, but not a place I would ever be alone. So.
And so what then after Butler, what brought you to Passavant?
It was too hard to keep my place up by myself. I didn't really like hiring somebody to mow the lawn because I liked to mow the lawn. And I liked to shovel the snow. And those were good things to be able to do, and now it was getting too hard to do them. So we were looking for a place. I don't know, can't remember exactly how we hit on this. It didn't look at too many places. Obviously, we lived very close to Concordia, so I looked there, but that wasn't for me.
Well, we're glad that you're here.
Yeah. The first time I came here was on horse trading days. I wasn't sure I'd ever figure out how to get through Celia.
Well, after your husband passed away, I know your brother's wife passed away.
Yes.
And he called you.
Yeah. They that was it. Well, that story is pretty interesting, between Harry and I especially. When I got married, I was the first one married, and 1 year later, on the same weekend, my brother Dave married his lovely Colleen, and 6 months after that, they're right on the dots, Harry and Rhoda got married, and after my husband died, 6 months after that, Rhoda passed away. So it was their anniversary was coming to come up for 1 year, and he called me, and he and Rhoda always went to Arizona for their anniversary celebration, and Harry called me and said, I'd kind of like to go, like we always did, but I don't really want to go alone. Will you go with me? So that was my first trip with Harry to Arizona, where Rhoda's sister and her husband lived, but we traveled around and went up to Grand Canyon and a lot of other things. We had a good time, and we got along so well that it was surprising to both of us, because we didn't see very much of each other from the time I was still in grade school until then. Once, family would get together maybe once a year while my mother and dad were alive, but we all lived in different areas, so we didn't get together much. But Harry and I made a good traveling companions, and it was really nice for me, and we made other trips together. Then we drove across Canada to Alaska, and it was magnificent, and it was in June, early June, and it wasn't tourist time yet. So we drove right up into the Yukon, and saw it was so different. And then we drove across the highest highway in America. It went from the Yukon over into Alaska, and so that's the way we got to Alaska, and it was then all over Alaska. That was a fantastic. People, I always say, people that take the boat ride, I'm sure, have a wonderful time, but they didn't see Alaska like we did. But it was great. We went to China. Carrie called me on that one. He said, Rhoda wouldn't go. She never wanted to go. She wouldn't go with me over there, and I'd still like to go, so how about going to China? So that was amazing and different, and we had wonderful guides and a wonderful little group that we traveled with. I think there were 8 of us. So it was very good. We went up into Nova Scotia and around up in that area of Canada. So had a lot of good times together for a few years.
You even sailed down the Danube. Did you go on?
Yes, we took a cruise down the Danube to Budapest.
Okay.
From Germany to Budapest. Mm-hmm. That was pretty good.
Yep. Again, speaking more to your adventurous spirit.
Yeah, I still have it.
Now, one of the stories that I think is so interesting is that we call you Jorie, but your family didn't. How did that come about?
Well, that's when I moved to Passivant. I was thinking, how am I going to adapt to this change in my life? And just trying to figure something out, and it all occurred to me, why not just use the other part of my name? I'd always been called Marge by everybody except my mother. My mother called me Marjorie. So anyway, that's how I came across, well, why don't you just use the other half of your name, and it'll be different but still familiar. But I think that was one of the best choices I've ever made because it's a different name that nobody else has. People remember me. So I get to say hello to a lot of people, and it's very nice.
Yeah.
I don't know everybody, but I know a lot of faces. I should get to know all the names.
Now, again, thinking about your adventurous spirit, are there any bucket list experiences that you still hope to do?
I have a great, big, empty bucket.
Yes.
I want more adventures.
But
I'm ready to go any place. Anybody going anywhere? Can I go along?
you said just not jumping out of a plane.
No, I'm not going to jump out of a plane. I might go up in a balloon.
Yes. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
So you're open to experiences still.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
So truly, if you have any ideas,
Life is not over. I'm still living it.
that's fantastic. Speaking of living life, what do you attribute your long life?
God only knows, not me. I've had lots of chances for it to stop, but it goes on. That's fine.
And any advice that you would give to young people nowadays?
Young people live in a completely different world than I've lived in. I don't understand the world now, but there's no advice you can give. It's like giving advice to people on Mars. Then I don't live there. No.
Well,
No.
we're almost out of time. Any other thoughts or stories that you wanted to share that we didn't bring up yet?
No, I don't know. Life comes and it goes and things happen and we leave the past behind and keep moving.
That's wonderful. I think that's great advice for young people. Just keep moving forward.
Yes, don't hang on to things that are past.
Wonderful. Well, Jorie, thank you for this conversation. And I would like to see if you would help me thank Jorie for sharing